Saturn, the next frontier in our understanding of life. We've been searching for water, hoped to find answers. Instead, we found it.
It's a ship, millions of years old. Who built it?
It's not a machine, it's alive. We shouldn't have woken them up.
This ship, it's breathing. It's waiting for us. It wants us. We were looking for answers. All we found was death.
The Perseverance. 7 glided silently towards Saturn, its sleek hull a fragile speck against the vast, swirling storms of the gas giant. The crew sat strapped into their stations in the observation deck, their faces illuminated by the amber glow of instrument panels. The planet loomed ahead, its rings shimmering like a crown of ice and rock, a hauntingly beautiful reminder of how far they had traveled from Earth. For some, it was awe-inspiring. For others, it was a source of quiet dread. Commander Julia Brennan leaned forward in her chair, her eyes fixed on the display. "Initiate atmospheric entry protocols," she ordered, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Aye, Commander," replied Ethan Carter, the pilot, as his hands danced over the controls. "Engaging heat shields, descent trajectory locked." The ship's engines hummed in response, a deep vibration that resonated through the metal hull. Julia glanced over her shoulder at the rest of the crew. Sophia Reyes was already strapped into her seat, a geological survey tablet clutched tightly in her hands. Dr. Malik Javed, the mission's biologist, stared intently at the live data feed from the external scanners. Viktor Ivanov and Dr. Claire Morgan exchanged a few quiet words near the engineering station, their voices barely audible over the low rumble of the ship. "Hard to believe we're actually here," Sophia murmured, her voice tinged with nervous excitement. "Saturn, it doesn't feel real." "It'll feel real soon enough," Malik replied, offering a half-hearted smile. "Once we're drilling through ice, you'll be wishing you were back on Earth." "Let's focus, people," Julia interjected. "We've trained for this. No surprises." As if on cue, the ship's hull groaned under the stress of entering Saturn's turbulent atmosphere. Ethan adjusted their trajectory, his knuckles white as he gripped the controls. Outside, the planet's golden haze gave way to layers of thick, churning clouds. Lightning arced in the distance, illuminating the dense fog with fleeting flashes of blue and white. "Hold steady," Ethan muttered to himself. The descent was rougher than simulations had predicted, the turbulence rattling the crew in their seats. "We've got some high wind shear, but we're stable." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the ship descended further, finally breaking through the thick clouds. Below them lay an expanse of glistening ice, stretching endlessly in all directions. Saturn's surface was a frigid wasteland of frozen methane and ammonia, its pale blue hue reflecting the dim light of the distant sun. "Commander," Victor's voice broke the silence. "Picking up an anomalous reading, starboard side." Julia frowned and leaned toward her console. "Define anomalous." "It's not natural," Victor said, his Russian accent growing thicker as his tension mounted. "The scanners are picking up a structure buried under the ice, metallic, large, too precise to be geological." The rest of the crew exchanged uneasy glances. Julia's pulse quickened. "Bring it up on the main display." The screen flickered and an image of the anomaly appeared. It was a jagged, angular shape, embedded deep beneath the surface, its dimensions unlike anything human engineering could create. The material appeared to absorb the scanner's waves, rendering it dark and featureless apart from its massive, symmetrical contours. "Is it a ship?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can't say for sure," Victor replied, "but it's been down there for a long time. The ice around it is at least 7 million years old." A heavy silence fell over the crew. They had expected to find evidence of water, perhaps microbial life trapped in the ice. But this was something else entirely. "What's our depth estimate?" Julia asked, her voice cutting through the tension. "Approximately 2 miles beneath the surface," Victor said. "We'll need to drill." Malik shook his head in disbelief. "A ship? 7 million years. This could be the discovery of the century." "Or it could be nothing," Julia said, though her tone lacked conviction. "We don't jump to conclusions. We proceed cautiously." "Do we have the equipment to reach it?" Sophia asked, breaking the uneasy silence. "Barely," Victor admitted. "It'll push our drilling rigs to their limits, but it's doable. The question is whether it's worth the risk." Julia glanced at the image on the screen. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, to stick to the mission's original objectives. But another part of her, the part that had signed up for this mission in the first place, refused to walk away from the unknown. "We came here to find answers," she said finally. "And I think we just found the biggest one of all. Victor, prep the drilling equipment. Ethan, find us a stable landing site. We're going in." The crew sprang into action, though the tension in the air was palpable. Ethan guided the ship to a flat expanse of ice near the anomaly, the landing gear extending with a hiss of hydraulics. The Perseverance 7 touched down with a faint shudder, its external lights cutting through the dim haze. "Touchdown confirmed," Ethan announced. "We're on the surface." Julia unstrapped herself from her seat and stood, her expression resolute. "Suit up. We've got work to do." As the crew prepared to disembark, an uneasy stillness settled over the ship. Outside, the icy wasteland stretched on, silent and unwelcoming. Above them, Saturn's rings glittered faintly, a reminder of the vast, indifferent cosmos surrounding them. Julia took one last look at the image of the buried structure before donning her helmet. Whatever lay beneath the ice, it was ancient. It was alien, and it was waiting for them. The crew descended into the shaft carved by their drilling equipment, the walls of ice shimmering under the harsh beams of their helmet lights. The temperature plummeted as they went deeper, their breath fogging the inside of their visors. The air was so still it felt oppressive, and the sound of their own movements echoed faintly in the narrow tunnel. After hours of grueling work, Victor announced they were approaching the anomaly's surface. "Final layers," Victor said, his voice crackling through the comms. "This is where it gets tricky. The material's dense, and we don't know how it'll react." "Take it slow," Julia replied, her tone measured but tight with tension. "We don't want to damage whatever's down there." The drill whirred to a halt, and Victor climbed into position, his gloved hands guiding a laser cutter to refine the edges of the excavation. A few more precise cuts, and the structure beneath the ice was revealed. a massive panel of alien metal, its surface unmarred by time. It shimmered faintly, reflecting their lights like a pool of dark water. "Looks like some kind of hatch," Sophia said, crouching beside Victor. She ran her gloved hand over the surface, feeling the faint vibrations beneath the metal. "It's warm?" "That shouldn't be possible," Malik said, scanning it with his instruments. 7 million years, buried in this ice? There shouldn't be any residual heat." "Well, it's not just warm," Sophia replied, her voice tight. "It's alive." Julia crouched beside her, studying the strange symbols etched into the surface. They pulsed faintly with a soft blue glow, as if responding to their presence. "Victor, any sign of a way to open it?" "Nothing obvious," Victor said, his brow furrowed as he examined the hatch. "But the material, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not just metal, it's biological." Claire, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "You're saying this thing is a living organism?" "Not in the way we define it," Victor replied. "It's more like a hybrid. Metal and organic components fused at a molecular level. And it's still functioning." The crew fell silent, the enormity of the discovery sinking in. Julia broke the tension. "We've come this far. We're not turning back now. Victor, try interfacing with it. If there's a way in, I want to find it." Victor nodded and pulled a small, portable data module from his pack. He connected it to the hatch, adjusting the device to adapt to the alien technology. The symbols on the panel flared brighter, and a low hum reverberated through the ice. "Something's happening," Sophia said, stepping back instinctively. The hatch split down the center with a hiss, a seam appearing where none had been visible before. As it opened, a wave of frigid air rushed out, carrying with it the faint scent of decay and something sharper, something chemical. The lights on their helmets pierced the dark void beyond, revealing a cavernous interior. "It's huge," Malik murmured, his voice barely audible. "It's like an entire world down here." The crew climbed through the opening, their boots clanging softly on the smooth, metallic floor. The walls were lined with intricate patterns, glowing faintly with the same blue luminescence they had seen on the hatch. The air inside was heavy, thick with an unnatural stillness that set Julia's nerves on edge. "Everyone stay close," Julia said, gripping her rifle tightly. "This place has been dormant for a long time, but we don't know what we're walking into." They moved deeper into the ship, their footsteps echoing faintly. The corridors seemed to twist and shift, their geometry disorienting. Sophia stopped abruptly, shining her light on the walls. "Commander, look at this." The others gathered around her, their beams illuminating what she had found. A series of pods, each one large enough to hold a human body. Frost clung to their surfaces, but through the translucent material, they could see the unmistakable forms of alien beings. They were unlike anything the crew had imagined, tall and slender, with elongated limbs and translucent skin that shimmered faintly in the light. Their heads were slightly larger than a human's, with angular features and eyes that seemed to refract the light like prisms. They lay motionless, their bodies encased in a thin layer of ice. "Are they dead?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "They're in some kind of stasis," Malik replied, scanning the nearest pod. The systems are still active, maintaining their bodies. This ship, it's not just a vessel, it's a life support system. 7 million years, Sophia whispered, her breath fogging the glass of her helmet. How is that even possible? Victor stepped closer, examining the control panel beside the pods. It's beyond anything I've seen. The technology, it's more advanced than anything we've dreamed of. If we could understand it. Commander, Malik interrupted, his voice tense. There's something else. Julia turned to him, her expression hardening. What is it? These aren't just stasis pods, Malik said, his scanner beeping faintly. They're designed for more than preservation. They're evolving the occupants. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Julia's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Malik hesitated, struggling to articulate what his readings were telling him. Their physiology, it's adapting, changing. The ship isn't just keeping them alive, it's enhancing them. Julia took a step back, her mind racing. We need to leave, now. Before anyone could respond, the lights on the ship surged, flooding the corridor with blinding blue light. The hum of the ship grew louder, vibrating through the floor and walls. The frost on the pods began to melt, the ice evaporating into wisps of steam. They're waking up, Sophia whispered, her voice shaking. Victor scrambled to disable the controls, but the alien technology resisted his efforts. I can't stop it, he shouted, his voice rising in panic. The first alien's eyes flickered open, their faceted surfaces glinting in the light. For a moment it was still, its gaze fixed on Julia. Then, with a fluid, unnatural motion, it began to move. The air in the cavernous chamber grew thick with tension as the first alien stirred within its pod. Its translucent, sinewy body moved with an unnatural grace, the limbs uncoiling like those of a predatory insect preparing to strike. The faint hum of the ship's systems became a low, resonant vibration, pulsating in rhythm with the alien's first deliberate movements. Frost and condensation dripped from its body, pooling at the base of the pod as it stepped out onto the metallic floor. No one spoke. No one dared to breathe. The alien turned its head slowly, its faceted eyes catching the harsh beams of their helmet lights, refracting them into spectral bursts of color that danced across the walls. It looked at Julia, not with the curiosity of a newly awakened being, but with a sharp, predatory focus that made her feel like prey. Back away, slowly, Julia said, her voice taut and controlled. Her team hesitated, frozen in place, their fear anchoring them to the ground. The alien's head tilted slightly, its movements almost avian, as though it were assessing them. Then it let out a sound, a low, resonating click that echoed through the chamber like a warning. The sound seemed to ripple through the other pods. One by one, the frost on their surfaces began to crack and melt. They're all waking up, Sophia whispered, terror creeping into her voice. Victor, is there a way to shut them back down? Julia asked, her gaze fixed on the alien. I don't know. The systems are locking me out. It's like the ship is fighting back. Victor's fingers flew over the control panel, sweat beading on his brow as he struggled against the alien technology. The second pod opened, then the third, each alien stepping out with the same fluid, unnervingly coordinated movements. Their bodies glistened in the dim light, their translucent skin revealing a complex network of pulsing veins and muscles beneath. Malik took a cautious step forward, his scanner raised. "Don't!" Julia barked, but it was too late. Malik extended a hand toward the nearest alien, as if to demonstrate they meant no harm. The alien's response was immediate and violent. Its arm lashed out with terrifying speed, the elongated fingers splitting apart into writhing tendrils. They latched onto Malik's helmet, piercing through the reinforced glass with a sickening crunch. Malik screamed, his body convulsing as the tendrils burrowed into his skin, spreading a dark, oily substance through his veins. "Malik!" Claire shouted, rushing forward, but Julia grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Stay away from him!" Julia yelled, her voice sharp with authority. Malik dropped to his knees, his body twitching violently as the tendrils retracted. For a moment he was still. Then he stood. His head snapped up, and his eyes, once warm and human, were now cold and faceted like the aliens. His movements were jerky and unnatural, as though he were a puppet being controlled by unseen strings. "Malik?" Sophia said hesitantly, her voice trembling. He turned toward her, his head cocking to one side in a grotesque mimicry of curiosity. Then, without warning, he lunged. Julia fired her rifle, the sharp crack of the shot echoing through the chamber. The bullet struck Malik in the chest, but he barely flinched, his movements unimpeded as he charged toward Sophia. Victor grabbed her and pulled her out of the way, narrowly avoiding Malik's grasp. "We have to get out of here," Victor shouted, his voice laced with panic. "The exit's blocked," Ethan called from the corridor behind them. "The hatch is sealed. Locked us in." "Then we find another way," Julia said, her mind racing. She fired another shot, this time at one of the aliens. The bullet struck its torso, but instead of blood, a viscous dark fluid seeped out, the wound closing almost instantly. The alien turned toward her, its tendrils unfurling like a deadly bloom. They scattered, each crew member diving for cover as the aliens advanced. The chamber erupted into chaos, the sound of gunfire and screams blending with the low, resonant hum of the ship. One by one, the aliens began to spread, their tendrils lashing out at anything that moved. Malik, now fully controlled by whatever had overtaken him, moved with the same horrifying coordination as the aliens, attacking without hesitation. Julia grabbed Claire and pulled her behind a console. "We can't fight them. We have to find a way to shut this place down." Claire nodded, her face pale but resolute. "If this ship is alive, maybe there's a central system, a core, something we can disable." "Victor," Julia called out over the comms, "can you access the ship's layout? Find us a way to the core." "I'm trying," Victor's voice crackled, barely audible over the sounds of the battle. "The system's... it's rewriting itself. Every time I think I've got something, it changes." "Figure it out," Julia snapped. "We don't have time." Ethan's voice broke through the chaos. "Commander, they're cutting us off." Julia peeked out from behind the console and saw what he meant. The aliens were herding them, their movements coordinated and precise. Every corridor, every possible exit was being sealed off. The walls themselves seemed to shift and close, the glowing patterns along their surfaces pulsating faster, almost as if the ship were alive and reacting to them. "This isn't just a ship," Claire said, her voice trembling. It's a trap. Julia didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind raced, but every plan, every scenario ended the same way, with no escape. The aliens were relentless, and the ship was their ally, an extension of their will. They had awakened something ancient, something that had been waiting in the ice for millions of years, and now it was awake. It was hunting them. Julia staggered through the narrowing corridor, her breath ragged, her legs heavy as if the air itself resisted her movements. The faint blue glow of the ship's walls pulsed like a heartbeat, a reminder that this place was alive, aware, and watching. Behind her, the distant echoes of Victor's screams still reverberated, though she tried desperately to block them out. She didn't look back. She couldn't. There was no time, no hope to save him or anyone else. She was the only one left, and even that felt like a cruel joke. Her hands shook as she clutched the rifle to her chest. She had fired it until her arms ached, until the magazine clicked empty, and even then it had made no difference. The aliens were too fast, too resilient. The crew had been no match for them, not even Malik, whose transformation had been the cruelest blow of all. She could still see his eyes, cold and inhuman, as he lunged at Sophia, his body no longer his own. They had been friends. They had shared laughs, dreams of what this mission could mean for humanity. Now, all of that was gone. The corridor opened into another vast chamber, but Julia barely noticed the intricate architecture or the haunting beauty of the alien design. Her eyes were drawn to the center of the room, where a massive, pulsating structure stood. It looked like a heart, dark and wet, its surface glistening with an oily sheen. Tendrils extended from it in every direction, weaving into the walls, the floor, the ceiling. This was it, the core, the living brain of the ship. Her boots splashed through the viscous fluid pooling around the base of the structure. The stench was overwhelming, a sickly mix of ammonia and decay. She raised her rifle instinctively, though she knew it was useless. The tendrils around the core moved, writhing like living things, and she could feel the ship's awareness focusing on her. It knew she was here. It was daring her to act. Julia's hand went to the pack strapped to her side. Victor's voice echoed in her mind, his last coherent words before the tendrils had dragged him into the darkness. If we can overload the energy systems, the core might collapse. He hadn't sounded confident. He hadn't sounded sure it would work. But it was the only plan they had, the only chance to stop this nightmare. Her fingers closed around the small, makeshift explosive Victor had rigged earlier. It was crude, improvised from what little they had left, but it would have to be enough. She pulled it free, her hands trembling as she armed it, the blinking red light on its surface a stark contrast to the blue glow of the ship. "Just set it and go," she whispered to herself. Her voice sounded hollow, foreign, in the oppressive silence of the chamber. "Just set it and—" A sound behind her, a wet, squelching noise that made her blood run cold. She turned slowly, the rifle raised, though she already knew what she would see. Malik, or what was left of him. His body was a grotesque amalgamation of human and alien, his limbs elongated and twisted, his skin translucent and glistening like the walls of the ship. The black veins that had spread through his body pulsed faintly, in perfect rhythm with the core behind her. His eyes, those horrible, refracted alien eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment she thought she saw something human in them. A flicker of recognition, pain. "Malik," she whispered, her voice cracking. She took a step back, but he mirrored her movement, his body jerking unnaturally, like a puppet on strings. He spoke then, his voice a guttural rasp, distorted and broken. "Julia, you shouldn't be here." Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. Somewhere, buried beneath whatever the aliens had done to him, he was still there. She lowered the rifle slightly, her grip faltering. "Malik, if you can hear me, fight it," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't have to let them control you." He twitched violently, his head snapping to one side as if the ship itself were reacting to her words. Too late. "For me," his distorted voice wavered, the pain evident in every syllable. "But you can end this." "I can't do it alone," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't even know if this will work. You have to." His body spasmed again, and the tendrils in the walls shuddered in unison. The ship was losing patience. "Don't let it spread." He took a step toward her, and she raised the rifle instinctively. But instead of attacking, he reached out, his grotesque hand trembling as it brushed against hers. His touch was cold, alien, but she didn't pull away. "Goodbye, Julia," he said, his voice softer now, almost human. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, he turned and lunged toward the core, his body slamming into it with a sickening thud. The tendrils reacted instantly, wrapping around him, pulling him into the pulsating mass. But his actions gave her the opening she needed. Julia didn't hesitate. She slammed the explosive against the base of the core and activated the timer. The red light began to blink faster, the countdown starting. She turned and ran, her boots slipping in the slick fluid, her breath ragged as she fled the chamber. The corridors twisted and shifted around her, the ship reacting to her escape, trying to trap her. The blue glow of the walls dimmed and flared erratically, as if the ship were in pain. Behind her, she could hear the core's shrill, unnatural screams reverberating through the halls. She reached the outer hatch just as the timer hit 0. The explosion rippled through the ship, a deep, resonant boom that shook the walls and sent her sprawling onto the icy surface outside. She lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, the cold biting through her suit. When she looked up, she saw the alien vessel sinking into the ice, its structure collapsing in on itself, the blue glow fading into darkness. It was over. But as Julia sat there, alone on the frozen wasteland of Saturn, the weight of what had happened crashed down on her. Her entire crew was gone, their lives consumed by the horrors they had uncovered. And what had it all been for? The questions they had sought to answer had only led to more. Who had built the ship? What was its purpose? Had she truly stopped it? Or was it only biding its time, waiting for the next curious explorers to awaken it? She removed her helmet, the icy air burning her lungs. She welcomed the cold. It seeped into her skin, numbing her body, her mind. She gazed up at Saturn's rings, their beauty undiminished even in the face of all she had lost. A faint smile crossed her lips as she closed her eyes, the cold finally taking her.